Welcome to Hauler Talk. I am Mike Forde with NASCAR Communications. I'm joined by my co-host, Amanda Ellis. Amanda, how you doing?
Welcome back. Fresh off a trip to Atlanta, so I'm excited to talk about that.
Lots of good stuff to talk about on Atlanta for sure. And my other co-host here, the writer for NBCSports.com, NASCAR.com, NASCAR Digital Media, Nate Ryan. What's going on, Nate?
Much great to see you guys virtually. I appreciate you guys both working with me on this, and our fabulous producer, John Hayes, as well, of setting this up. So we're trying this a different way, but hopefully it'll seem seamless for those listening at home.
Absolutely. I think you sound great. You look a little bit blurry, but not your usual handsome self in high definition, but we'll make do. As long as you sound good, I don't think anyone cares about how you look. That's how I got this job anyway. So obviously, everyone who's listening to this, I'm sure, is fully aware and has heard discussions about it and has posted on social media about it. Cautions at the end of these races, especially super speedway races. We've now run 9 super speedway races to begin the season, and that includes 2 dual races and an ARCA race at Daytona. So. And I don't know the number off the top of my head, but at least 75 of them have ended under had a wreck on the last lap. So we're talking about it again, and so we let it go green on Saturday evening in the Xfinity race, and I'm going to now kick it back to Amanda. So once that happened, a chain of communication really took place between NASCAR competition and the industry on how we should look at the last lap and if there's a wreck. So, Amanda, from your perspective, you were in race control. You were able to hear those conversations, and you were in the hauler, the NASCAR hauler, and able to be a part of those conversations. What can you tell the fan, the listener, about what all went on in that not even 24-hour period, but 12 to 18-hour period?
Yeah, and I will say, as you mentioned, I was in race control. An end of a race moves very quickly. When, we had Austin Hill cross the finish line, you knew you had a wreck as well. And there's, if you've ever, I know, Forde, you've been in race control, but there's a lot of moving parts that really kick into play and start taking place. We're dispatching equipment. We're also trying to capture the field. You're trying to bring the field down pit road. Then you move into a technical inspection. So there's just a lot of things that are happening in those moments. And honestly, I'm not afraid to admit, I didn't think that last, lap wreck was that bad. I recognize watching the replays and kind of seeing some of the vantage points we have in hindsight. I do understand why we feel like we should have thrown the caution and we said, that's on us. But in the first few moments after that, I didn't necessarily think that it was that bad because I knew we were able to dispatch the equipment on the backstretch to make sure we got to the drivers and things like that. However, looking at the replays, we now see some other things that we're not comfortable with. So after that race wrapped, there's a couple of areas of communication that drivers have and can use and do use throughout a race weekend. So drivers can call our officials. They have cell phone numbers for them. They are welcome to pick up the phone and call them. And that did happen. There was a driver or two that did make that call. There is a driver text chain that you often will hear referenced. Sometimes the drivers will reference that they can offer their thoughts and opinions in. And that also took place following that incident. And then there's also the opportunity to truly, kind of meet face to face or over, a virtual meeting or something of that nature. And that also took place between the hours where we wrapped the Xfinity race and moved into Sunday's event. So through those conversations and listening and understanding where, everyone was coming from and their concerns, we really ended in a place where if that incident happened on Sunday, on the last lap or really throughout the race, but ultimately on the last lap, NASCAR would throw the caution. And Elton Sawyer referenced that in the drivers' meeting. And in a sense of foreshadowing, it did happen for that last lap of the NASCAR Cup Series race. But I do think we have Elton's audio. So we'll let the fans hear that so they can understand where we're kind of coming from in those comments.
So before we roll that audio, I just want to go through the drivers meeting real quick. So it's if you haven't been to a drivers meeting, they introduce some celebrities who are part of the race, dignitaries, things like that, and then Elton Sawyer, the senior vice president of competition for NASCAR, says a few words to the drivers, goes over the rules of the race, if there's any special things going on as far as unique changes from the previous year, goes over the stage lengths, things like that, and then as he did in this particular instance, there was an updated procedure, if you will, on how we looked at caution. So I believe we have the entirety of Elton's audio here from start to finish during the drivers' meeting.
Stage breaks today will be 60, 160, and 260. DVP clock will be extended by a minute due to the length of pit road, so it'll be 8 minutes. Race above the double white line. Then my last comment will be, based on last night's race, our goal is to finish our races under green conditions. That's our number one goal. But also, we're not going to be racing through a debris field. So you can expect, cautions to come out based on last night. That was on us. So the situation that comes up today, like last night, will be a caution. So good luck today. All the best. Please turn your attention to the video. Thank you.
So a little inside baseball from a communication standpoint. Amanda did a great job down in Daytona. Wanted to make sure fans were aware of these comments from Elton, because this is something they didn't know if we were going to call the last lap differently than we did the night before and the week before at the Daytona 500. So a number of media members, Bob Pockris, Jordan Bianchi, Dustin Long, at least went into the drivers' meeting and reported this news that Elton, I guess, quote unquote, broke, and wrote either stories about it or posted about it on X. Then we have the race, go through the entire race. Great event, record for lead changes. I think it tied or came just short of the number of different leaders. And once again, at the super speedways, we have a wreck at the front of the field. Barry, I believe, was running sixth, turns into oncoming traffic, and the caution is thrown, and really kind of ending what could have been another three-wide finish, another documentary moment, and there was obviously wildfire on social media following that because of the seeming inconsistency from the previous day and week. All fair, I think. I think if fans didn't have social media, didn't have X, weren't on their computers and looking up NBCSports.com and reading Dustin Long's story, they probably did not know about this and didn't realize this was going to even be a change. So I get it. I get the the anger and the disappointment. But I think, as Elton said, this morning, we're taping this on a Tuesday afternoon on Sirius XM, we want to finish under green flag conditions, as he said in the drivers' meeting. That's really what we want, but we're not going to do that at the risk, to risk driver safety. So that's the balance. Whether you like it or not, that is kind of where we are, at least on these super speedways when there's very tight packs and tight racing. Now, we're going to COTA, a totally different racetrack. And Jason, if you listen to last week's episode, Jason kind of pointed this out as well. Racetracks and how you call cautions at different racetracks varies as well. So consistency is going to be difficult to uphold because of the different racetracks. So at a road course, they're more spread out. There are more runoff areas. So if there is a wreck at the quote-unquote front of the field between the two leaders, say, it might not be a caution because you can see that we'll have to see if the trailing cars are in a precarious position. And at road courses, because it's so spread out, and they might not be, and we might be able to keep it green. I would say that we probably will keep it green at a road course. So it's going to be something that is probably going to be a conversation, but I think a lot of this has to do with all these last lap wrecks, and we're talking about officiating, and that's something that's been said. We don't want to talk about officiating. I don't think we're talking about bad officiating. This is my North Korea state-run media hat being put on, but we're just talking about officiating in general. And that's because there's last lap wrecks. If there weren't wrecks, we wouldn't be talking about it. I think whether it was a by the book call, whether it was a perfect call, there are going to be fans that disagree with the call, fans that love the call. And that's how you just talk about officiating. It's whether it's good or bad. So that's kind of where we are. Nate, I know you have some opinions on this topic. The floor is yours.
Okay, I just have a couple of thoughts. One, I think you make a really important point here that a lot of this is just a byproduct of wrecks at the end of a race. And when you start your year with 2 super speedways, you're going to have essentially 6 races that are going to have wrecks on the last lap. And I weighed in on my thoughts on super speedways last week, and this is part of the reason why I'm not the biggest fan of super speedways. 3 wide finishes aside, and certainly would look like Sunday was going to give NASCAR that again. I want to say, again, making our weekly point here to cite Denny Hanlon's Actions Detrimental podcast.
Check the box.
Denny said on his podcast that he 100% agrees with NASCAR. This is quoting Denny, you keep the races green, someone will get hurt. That race, meaning Sunday's race at Atlanta, had to end under caution. Let's applaud NASCAR on making the right call for safety. Then I thought Denny said something that was very interesting and that I sort of take issue with, and I feel like is sort of getting lost in a lot of this discussion, and it's nuanced, and I get it because a lot of nuance always gets lost in racing. But what Denny said was, it sucks, but we're the ones who choose to wreck. Let's start a new trend of consistency now. And he mentioned that Kevin Harvick also said he didn't like how the Daytona 500 ended, that he thought that was unsafe. And that, it's different week to week and ended under green at Daytona, didn't at Atlanta. And so Denny's point is, and Harvick's point, a lot of other people's points is, let's be consistent. I have an issue with that because of what you said, Forde. And Jusan Hamilton's comments on our episode last week made a lot of waves, and I thought were great because he kind of put it out there that if he could do the Daytona qualifier again, he would probably do it differently. He probably would have let that qualifying race in under green. And I think that was the big takeaway from last week's episode. And I think the problem with that is I think the bigger takeaway should have been what he said about how it varies track to track. And you said that, Jeff Burton said that on Inside the Race this week. And to Denny's point and others about wanting to be consistent here, I don't understand how NASCAR can be consistent if it's going to vary track to track. If Atlanta is different from Daytona in terms of dispatching safety vehicles, in terms of the length of the track, people want consistency, but you can't give them consistency on these kinds of calls if every track is different. And by definition, every track in NASCAR is different. It's like saying we're going to have consistent ground rules from Yankee Stadium to Wrigley Field to Fenway Park. It's not possible. It's not possible when you have stadiums and venues of wildly divergent dimensions. So I think that's when I look at all this, I understand everybody's opinions on it, but my opinion is I don't know how you can consistency if it varies track to track. And I don't know if either of you guys can shed light, but I mean, how is Atlanta different from Daytona in terms of emergency response? We talked about cutouts. It's a shorter track. How do we get into that and explaining what would be different there?
Well, good news, Nate. I have some of that information. It's a great point and a great conversation that I truly think from time to time that, understandably fans don't always have this information when they're trying to make their thoughts and opinions, about an event. So let's take Daytona. Let's take Atlanta. Daytona has a total of 9 cutouts that we have access to, that we can use, safety vehicles, also areas that cars can also get off the track. So if you have an incident and a car needs to get safely somewhere, again, there are 9 cutouts at Daytona. Going to Atlanta, there are 4. So that is a big difference. 9 cutouts in Daytona, 4 in Atlanta. And that alone makes calling those 2 races exactly the same, in my opinion, very challenging.
Yeah, I think you both really put it well. It's going to be different. Every wreck is different. Where it happens, what the racetrack is, what the cutouts look like, how much space you have to maneuver and be around is different. Being consistent is going to be tough. They're always going to try their best. The race directors have meetings upon meetings. So on Tuesday, here's how our Tuesday lays out. So we have an 8:30 a.m. meeting led by Elton Sawyer, and that is kind of a competition overview that each series goes through everything that went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do better, and that goes from 8 to 8:30. We have a meeting with Goodyear at 9:30, from 9:30 to 10:30. Then we have something called a sporting meeting, where we go over more rule book adjustments that may or may need to happen. And then after that, there's some break-off meetings. So the race directors, there's 4 of them. Jason Hamilton, Tim Berman, Jesse Little, and Chase Briscoe, they meet. They go over every single caution that is called throughout a weekend and really just judge themselves, almost give themselves a grade on how they did over the weekend. Track Services, led by Chase Briscoe, so he wears a couple hats. Track Services is the emergency equipment movement team. They have the same thing. They have the same type of meeting of how, kitty litter, how we can do better there. How we can dry the track faster, how we can, sweep up debris quicker, get back to green flag racing quicker. So they grade themselves on that as well. So they are working hard to be consistent. But to your point, Nate, I think it's a perfect one. It's difficult when you have different racetracks, and NASCAR has the most diverse set of racetracks of any motorsport, I imagine. We went from a 2.5 mile super speedway to a 1.5 mile super speedway to a road course, then a 1 mile oval, and then a 1.5 mile intermediate track in the first 5 races of the season. So it's tough, but we're going to do our best, and that's our job. We understand that we're going to be under a microscope, and we're fine with that. And we do it because we love it. And NASCAR, we love NASCAR racing, and we love bringing this sport to the fans. So hopefully we're done with last lap caution discussions. And I think we've exhausted this one. At least I'm exhausted. So I think we can move on to a more fun topic, like, I don't know, disqualifications and appeals.
Sounds great, Forde. And I feel like I wasn't really enough of an instigator in the caution discussion, so perhaps I should be, as my dream did not come true of Parker Kligerman beating you guys on the appeal. Gargamel came down the mountain and stomped Parker's dream of winning at Daytona. So
you kept the flag. I kept the flag.
Yeah,
there's one flag we know where that is.
And Parker discussed all this on his podcast with Landon Castle, Money Lap. So encourage people to listen to that and hear his side. But I want to give you a chance, I think, Forde, to respond to a lot of what Parker put out there. I think the main question I think that he has, and a lot of people have about the way this transpired, is that one, post-race, apparently he had changed in the last couple of years about how the heights were measured. And this team is a small team, Henderson Motorsports, doesn't run full time, doesn't finish in the top 5 very often, so wasn't aware of this change taking place. And then they also didn't have their crew chief in post-race tech. I presume he may have been in the media center for post-race interviews or doing other things like that. Can you address all of Parker's concerns on that front to start with? Sure.
Yeah, I honestly would say I would listen to that first. The entire episode, but that part about the DQ, I thought he did a really, really good job. And I don't, his opinion, when he started off the podcast, he says, I'm going to just spit facts. I don't know if that was the exact quote, but he wasn't trying to crush people with opinions and try to change people's minds of here's why I'm right, here's why I was robbed, or any of that. He just kind of went in a very, fact-based demeanor, measured demeanor, and gave the facts as he sees them. And I think he nailed it. There were, in the appeal, there were, disagreements on the process. And that's, I guess, what you're talking about. So how the heights work in post-race is the top 5 trucks, assuming there's no significant damage to the nose or the rear, get measured. So we have been doing this process since the beginning of 2023, and we've been measuring them longer than that. but we have the process that is currently in place since 2023. And the reason we changed it from 2022 to 2023 is actually also an appeal. So side note, when we have an appeal, whether NASCAR wins or loses, and just I'm going all kinds of different tangents here, but the appeal is heard by a 3-member panel of industry, quote unquote, experts, folks who have been in the industry for many years and understand. Some have a high level of technical background, some do not, but they give of their time freely. They are not paid. They're volunteers, really, and so we really appreciate that they raise their hands to do this. Come to the R&D Center and hear both sides of the story. So NASCAR starts off the appeal, then it goes to the appellant, and they give their side, and then there's rebuttal on each sides, and NASCAR closes it out since the burden is on us, and the burden is it more likely than not that a penalty has been that a violation has occurred. So it's not Landon Castle, I texted him the other day. He posted a tweet that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's why they didn't use that language. No, they didn't use that language because it is not the language they have to use. In the rule book, it says more likely than not that a violation has occurred. So that's the appeal process. We, in 2022, lost an appeal, a heights appeal to the 88 truck, driven by Matt Crafton at the time. And we realized there were some issues with how we were doing the height, specifically with the shocks. So in 2023, we started measuring the trucks by unhooking the shocks prior to actually measuring them. So that is that delineation of 2022 to 2023. Since then, we have measured approximately 170 trucks throughout those 2 years plus. So again, that if you do 5 times 25, the top 5 times 25 races times 2 plus 1 doesn't equal to 170. I think it's more like 270. But like I said, if there's significant damage to the rear or the front, we don't measure them because we recognize that there is race damage, and we're not going to fail someone that has significant race damage. So that wasn't the case for the 75. So what the teams are allowed to do, they bring it to the ramps of the height station. They set the air pressures of the tires, and these are the air pressures that are used in pre-race inspection, and it varies by racetrack. They top off fuel to get back to inspection weight, unhook the shocks, and set the nose to wherever they want. So the teams can lower or lift the nose, measure it, and then we roll it up and then do the sticks. If they're in red, they fail. If they're in the green or yellow, they pass. And Parker's truck failed.
And can you address the crew chief side of it? And I mean, you said last week, the Q rating for this was a 0. Is there some way to address this, or are there learnings from this that you guys can take and say, hey, make sure that we have a senior level of the team there for inspection next time? Are there any takeaways from that side of it?
Yeah, Nate, I can answer that. I think just for the listeners to know that for Craftsman Truck Series races and the NASCAR Xfinity Series races, we do not require the crew chief to be in the media center post-race. That is something that we do require on, for Cup races, but for those 2 races, we do not. And someone might say, well, why is that? And a little bit of background on that is a lot of times for truck races and at times even Xfinity races with later start times, it becomes a little bit late in the evening, and at the time, sometimes we felt like there wasn't as much interest. So that is one reason why the race winner comes in, specifically for those 2 events. But ultimately, I don't want to speak specifically, on or about Chris, but I will speak in general terms that, many times, even on Sundays, we'll have a crew chief that will come in and they will say, let me answer my questions and let me go. I need to get, I want to get to the tech process. That's where they want to be. We work with them. We do that. I mean, almost every Sunday, if we can release the crew chief first, we will. This was an incident where we did not require Chris to come into the media center, but it was my understanding that they wanted to come in. And I'm not sure exactly how that kind of transpired, but ultimately came in, he did answer the questions and do the things that are involved in a media availability post-event. But ultimately, that's not a requirement. And if at any point there was a conversation where he needed to leave that stage or go to tech, he would have been allowed to do so.
Yeah, so to answer your question, Nate, on what we do moving forward. So there was as you heard in Parker's podcast, that he said, she said, I believe that the team members suggest that we told them that they had to lift up on the nose. Our inspector has said he did not say that. I'm obviously biased, but our lead Truck Series inspector, Bradley Hauk, has been doing this. Has been in that role for 6 years. This is his 7th season in that role as lead tech inspector for the Truck Series, and has been a NASCAR official for 14 years. So certainly would not veer off course that significantly, and make it completely different for this team than others teams. So I find that a little bit hard to believe. So I'm going to take Bradley's word for that one. But to answer your question, it was a smaller team, as you said, some volunteers. They had lost their truck chief the day before because of multiple failures. Chris was in the media center, so they didn't have that leadership. So what we're going to do moving forward, previously what we did was we verbalized the team. Here's what you are allowed to do. And that is set the nose, measure it, so on and so forth. We have now, simple thing, but we have, as part of the post-race procedure, we've had a card. Now a page of the card that we're handing out to teams has everything that they're allowed to do, and the procedure is now going to be written out, handed to teams. So we're out of the verbal business. It's all going to be in writing. Just tighten up that area so that if a crew chief, for whatever reason, does come to the media center or isn't available because he's health reasons, whatever the reason is, they at least have this in writing. They can go step by step. Here's what I need to do. Here's what I'm allowed to do. Here's what I can't do. And hopefully that cleans up that communication breakdown that clearly happened post-race at Daytona, and had this unfortunate storyline that we're glad we're talking about it, because I think it's important for the fans to understand the process, but also we want to be talking about the great racing at Atlanta and COTA coming up here. But so that's what we're doing moving forward on the truck side. And speaking of appeals, we do have one coming up, obviously a big one. The number 19 car driven by Chase Briscoe for Joe Gibbs Racing had an illegal part we found a violation of the rule book. I guess you can say it's not a pending appeal. And that came out last Wednesday, teardown inspection after Daytona. Took the 2 and the 19 home for teardown. The 19, we did find a problem with the spoiler base and issued a pretty large penalty, 100 points, among other fines and crew chief suspension, things like that. So we're going to hear that appeal, I should say, on March 5th, so next Wednesday. So stay tuned for that. Probably won't be able to talk about that next week. That'll be after we tape episode 4, but the week after we'll get into that. And then one other item on the sort of inspection and penalty topic. We started doing this, I want to say 2 years ago, displaying parts like in the old days, the Bill Franz Jr. days, where they used to have a table outside the hauler and they would put the illegal parts that everyone can see and see what the teams were tinkering with and stepping over the line of the NASCAR rule book. So we brought that back a couple of years ago. in the sake of transparency. And so this weekend in COTA, stay tuned to your social media feeds. We're going to do that again, this time with the 2 penalties issued to the 34 and 51 teams at Daytona. The ballast, they used ballast in the water system. So there'll be some interesting videos and photos and some of the ingenuity, I guess you can call it, from those 2 teams to try to make their cars a little bit lighter for qualifying. So that's coming up on Saturday.
One thing that I know we wanted to discuss last week, this playoff committee that met at Daytona National Speedway during Speed Weeks. Very varied committee, industry-wide, broad selection of people. Take us inside the room. Tell us what that first meeting was like as the discussions happen to address what might be different about the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs in 2026.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I thought it was, and first, it was an honor to be a part of it and to be asked to be a part of it. So from the NASCAR side, Ben Kennedy is the chairperson for it. He's kind of being, his right-hand woman is Julia Landauer. Many fans know Julia from her racing days. She now has joined NASCAR and is doing a lot of work on Ben's team, sort of business strategy type efforts. And she's more than just a racer, too. She graduated from Stanford. I think she does have a business degree, so she's a really good addition to this particular committee. And then Tim Clark, who is Amanda and I's boss's boss, the chief brand officer. He's kind of leading the blocking and tackling, has set up the committee, has put together a lot of the names. And like you said, cross-functional, cross-departments, cross-industry-wide group. And, when we were coming up with sort of the rules of the road for this playoff committee, it was kind of, you can talk about it if you want to. We didn't want you to lobby what your idea was, and just so that if you had the biggest microphone, you got preferential treatment or you got your idea at the forefront. So I'm not going to go ahead and say who's on the committee, but it is a lot of the bigger drivers that you would imagine, team owners, manufacturers, several from NASCAR, some broadcast partners. So it was a really interesting discussion. I think a lot of the names you would suggest. So you have names that are pro how it is right now, want to keep it that way. Names that aren't so pro and want to change it completely. So I thought it was a really interesting discussion.
So when you say drivers, we're talking active drivers. Are we also talking retired drivers? Are we talking Hall of Famers?
Both.
I understand you don't want to reveal exactly who's on the committee, but can you give us maybe just a swath, a cross section of who generally is on in terms of categories and maybe how many from each category?
Absolutely. And I think, and they may be fine with me talking about that they're on it. I just haven't asked that permission to them, and I really don't want them to be put in a spot where, they wanted to keep their dealings and their involvement private. But a lot of them have podcasts, let's put it that way. So we do have retired drivers who are in
that narrows it down.
That does not. Yeah, it's a good point. We have retired drivers who are in the Hall of Fame. We have current drivers. What we try to do and what we try to do in all instances, we try to break it down from an OEM perspective, so manufacturer perspective. You have a driver who races for Ford, you have a driver who races for Toyota, and you have a driver who races for Chevrolet. And then you also have 2 drivers who are also owners that are in it, so they can give that perspective. So I think I probably just gave away 2 of those names there. But one name I will say, because I want to give him props, and he doesn't know I'm going to say this, but I want to. I do want to talk about him, and hopefully he doesn't mind. But one of the drivers we have on there is Christopher Bell, and why I want to bring him up is because NASCAR has really turned to him as a leader in the garage. We have recognized his talents. We've recognized his voice. I think how he handled the disappointment of Martinsville, we took notice of that. He was vocal and super candid, as you guys all remember, in the media center. And I think a lot of people would probably assume that we didn't care for that, but the opposite. We met with him prior to that engagement in the media center. I met with him in January again to talk about where we were with the playoffs, to invite him as part of this committee. He did speak up in the committee and gave some ideas. And things that we should maybe think about. Rotation of the championship, for instance, was a big one on his plate or on his mind. So I could see, and I feel strongly about Christopher Bell being a future star. He's a current star, but as far as showing his personality and things like that, I think he's has the ability to become a really big fan favorite. He has the skill set. We saw it, what he did in Atlanta, and I think he's going to be a multi-time champion by the time his career is over. And with that comes a lot of responsibility, and you see that from Joey Logano too. He takes being a champion very seriously, and I think we're going to see that from Christopher Bell. I think he has really wanted to embrace that leadership role, and so he is part of the committee, and I think he's going to be a valuable one.
And I will add, I'm not part of the committee, but I will say I'm aware of who is on the committee, and it is a very robust list of people who are engaged in this conversation and the opportunity that they will have as they kind of work through the meetings in the committee itself, that I think fans would be very happy with who is on that list.
Christopher Bell's an interesting name for it, and obviously in the news this week, having won in Atlanta. He was on NASCAR Daily this week. I heard Jeff Burton on Inside the Race, the NASCAR podcast, talking about what you just talked about, that how candid Christopher Bell was after Martinsville in the playoffs last year, basically saying at Phoenix next week he felt like he was robbed of a chance to run for the championship. And that was, I think, a more forthright, outspoken side of Christopher Bell we hadn't seen before. And I think that's appreciated. If NASCAR sees that and sees, Burton said the same thing, if Christopher Bell wants to be a leader and NASCAR is going to kind of give him a chance to do that by being part of this committee, I think that's great. One thing I want to ask you, Forde, because you're in the room, again, it's week one, but can you give us a sense of the tenor of those discussions? I mean, you're saying that there's obviously differences of opinion. You want differences of opinion. You want guys on either side of the issues here. But what were the discussions like? Did it get heated at all in week one in terms of talking about like what direction NASCAR should go in next year?
No, not heated at all. It was a really educational, valuable discussion. And I think by the end of it, so let me back up. I think there are probably, you're looking about 25 people on the panel from all walks of life. And I was kind of interested to see how it would start. And the agenda was an open one. There was no agenda. Tim Clark and Ben Kennedy opened the meeting and then really rolled out the balls, and anyone who wanted to speak spoke. And the first one to speak was a retired NASCAR Hall of Famer, and had a bunch of research, very well prepared, and his idea or his pitch was to go back to the 36 race season and 36 race championship. Others went the opposite direction and said, well, I like the playoffs. I think that it is important to have eliminations. It is something that TV really embraces, and so. But how about we do it a little bit differently? Is it a 7-race lead-in to a 3-race championship? That was one idea that was kicked off. Do we reduce the field from 16 to 12 or 10 as we did, in prior iterations of the Chase/playoffs? So there were a lot of different things discussed. The step one of the meeting was to really just throw ideas out there, good or bad. What are the things we're trying to solve for? So really, I think Tim Clark opened up the meeting to sort of with the goal of, here's what we want to do. We want to create a playoff system, whether it's keeping it or changing it, that crowns a deserving champion, but also maintains or elevates fan engagement, whether that is from a digital perspective, social perspective, or most importantly, butts in the seats and eyeballs on the television. So we wanted to keep that in mind, and whatever idea we do land upon or throw out, we asked that the people in the rooms kept those two things. We wanted the competition for sure, but we want fans to be really engaged with the product as well. So I think there were a lot of good discussions with that. So like I said, you had everything from eliminate the playoffs altogether to keeping the playoffs, changing the way the eliminations rounds are. We also talked a little bit about stages and stage racing and stage points. So it's not just a playoff discussion either. That was the majority of the discussion, but there was a lot of how we race as well. Okay, we're now joined by our special guest this week for episode 3 of Hauler Talk, and that is the SVP of Operations and Development for Speedway Motorsports, Steve Swift. Steve, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing great. Hopefully you guys are doing the same.
So, Steve, besides, this is the second consecutive week we have a CrossFit member joining our podcast, which is making me feel really good. But Steve's kind of the guy we go to from NASCAR perspective whenever there is a track change, track layout, configuration, if we need help with safer barriers, if we need help with sand barrel, his name comes up more than any non-NASCAR employee in competition meetings, I think, than anyone else in the industry. So, Steve, my first question to you, or our first question to you, is putting dirt on a short track, reconfiguring a 1.5 mile to a super speedway, turning a 1.5 mile oval to a road course, shortening a course by half almost with COTA this weekend. Whenever Marcus has an idea, I feel like he picks up the phone and calls you, and you have to get it done. I know this is a broad question and probably impossible to answer, but there's no school to go to for that. So how do you go about doing things like that when you have to answer those calls? And thus far, you've nailed it and have done some pretty good racing in all those examples, especially coming off this another one with the Atlanta race this past weekend.
You know, it's funny. So I had the fortune to work for Bruton as well early on, and naturally Bruton did a lot of humongous construction projects and different things, and first lights on a racetrack, so on and so forth. So doing all that, you know that they definitely have big visions and really want to try to figure out how to push the limit, do things differently. There is no degree, naturally, as you said, or schooling that kind of teaches that thing. But, luckily being in the construction world, engineering minded, we're taught to troubleshoot, try to figure out solutions. And working for a family like the Smith family with huge visions, and having the fun, it's more fun to be able to try to figure those things out and try to troubleshoot and figure out how to make those things happen than to just do status quo, right? So building just grocery stores over and over and over is not as much fun as doing the crazy things that we get to do. So, blessed to have a family that has trust in us to be able to do that. And there's a huge team that naturally I work with that every time we go to them, there's never a say no. How we take care of those things is go through and we make those things happen. We take that vision and try to figure out, all right, what's the first steps? What do we need to do? Who's the right people to talk to? What teammates do we need to pull into this to make this happen? And so far, we've been fortunate and blessed to hit most of the parameters. I know there's always some offshoots. We did have some things that we've done that weren't necessarily hit the marks, trying to make changes, but taking those visions and turning them into reality is a lot of fun. And you just build a good team around you, and everybody's got that attitude to pull the rope in the same directions. And, you throw the one thing in that's a different element than not is, we have tried, as we know in the past, we did not, to pull driver input into it. To try to really make sure, naturally that we're using what we think the fans want to see, as well as definitely pulling for 40 different opinions of what they think should be, and then trying to find and weigh that balance to make it be something that's good for both parties.
That driver input is definitely what was on my list to ask you about, Steve. So you talk about visions. Marcus Smith has this vision for reimagining Atlanta Motor Speedway as a quasi mini super speedway, mini Daytona Talladega. And I was there in July 2021 when drivers met with the media because it was race weekend in Atlanta. It was a couple of days after most of them had just learned that this was going to happen. And I don't have to tell you that there was a lot of pushback at that time. What are you doing with this beloved speedway that drivers love for its worn out asphalt? You're blowing it up. You're reconfiguring it. Why? And contrast that with what we heard certainly Sunday at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Drivers now hailing this as probably their favorite super speedway. Christopher Bell obviously is biased, but he said that after winning the race. So, two-part question for you. One, did you expect to be able to have the tide turn that quickly and have drivers warm to it so quickly? And then the second part would be, it seems as if the asphalt is wearing a little bit more quickly. And we heard drivers talk about that. They wonder how long you'll be able to keep this style. So one, are you glad that they're so receptive to it? But two, are you also thinking, how do you keep it in this sweet spot that you have it right now as the asphalt wears?
Yeah, so that's a lot of answers that I'll try to cover them all. Naturally, back in Atlanta when we talked about redoing this, we did not get driver input, at the beginning of it. Thus the uproar whenever it became, and the pothole developed in the front stretch with 5 laps, and we didn't time that. That just happened naturally. It's showing that it did need to be replaced. We did not have driver input because naturally at that time, super speedways weren't something that drivers really wanted on the circuit, right? When I say that, they were happy with just having Daytona and Talladega, right? That wasn't that they didn't want them, they just didn't want more. And not knowing what Atlanta would truly prove, naturally did work with iRacing, and we did have meetings after that uproar with a couple drivers or more than 2, but to kind of explain what the vision was and what we were trying to achieve and try to let them understand more, maybe not accept or like, but hopefully they would understand more what we were trying to get to. So from that point, naturally, we have gotten a lot of drivers' input. Going back to Mike's question about dirt on Bristol, naturally, who do you go to? You go to the Christopher Bells, you go to the Kyle Larsons of the world, the Austin Dillons that race dirt a lot and get a lot of input from them on how to do that. And then I think we've done better as an industry of really talking to everybody and all parties that are involved to make sure that we're doing things that may not be something they want. Naturally, I think, Nate, you've heard me say this in the past, that if the drivers like it, the fans usually hate it. If the fans like it, the drivers don't necessarily like it at that aspect. I think Atlanta has been one of those really odd things that we've done here in the recent years that all parties are accepting and thinking that it's great. Naturally, there are people that don't like the racing style. They're just not super speedway people, and there's drivers in the same front. But I think all in all, if you took a total poll, the percentages would say that everybody feels that Atlanta was a really good play and a really good repave and resurfacing or restructuring of a facility that, had been something different in the past. And that's a tough thing to get. That really surprised me that, this quickly we would get all the parties to say, man, this thing's great. This is really awesome. From my standpoint, I very rarely, as many races I go to, am I on the edge of my seat during the entire race. Atlanta continues to produce that. And it's really amazing that it continues to do so. As far as the aging process on the track, we planned that. I don't know if you remember when we talked about that, with North Wilkesboro's repave, we tried to do some different paving technology that Marcus spoke on to try to get tracks to age quicker. So we ended up, the biggest complaint usually out of a repave is they stay super sticky or single groove for a long period of time. They don't widen out. So we did some things to our paving technology to really try to achieve that. And really, there's not a great testing atmosphere that you can put things into to tell that you're doing the right things until you actually have race cars on the track and competitors in the seats that are running laps, right? That really gives you the ultimate test, and it's tough to simulate that. It's tough to put that. I'm sure drivers would tell you the same thing when they're simming. It's close, but it doesn't give you the real feel until you're really behind the seat and actually on the track. And it's the same thing for us when we're doing track redesigns, again, to give Marcus his dues. He takes huge chances. Like, it's a huge financial, chance to go out there and do something that's never been done or never been seen. And even with the paving technology, something that's not tried and true, right? We all know we can place asphalt and it'll last for 20 years, but it doesn't give you the great racing on the front end. He seized us with a way to try to get the asphalt to age in a quicker time frame, so you get great racing from the get-go or within 2 to 3 years. And it's a huge risk to take, right? That's a financial risk that not everybody's willing to take. And again, you can't test that to make sure it happens. So having the faith and, the trust in us to make those decisions and then stand behind us when we make them to put that out there on the tracks really says a lot about how he feels for us and, the trust that we've got as a company. So it's fantastic. Atlanta, again, I would have never guessed that drivers would have been saying, especially after that lovely summer month we had 3 years ago, that we'd get drivers saying, man, this track's awesome. I got to never guess that'd be the case, but it was really great to hear that. And I'm glad that, that the track has produced great events for not only the fans, but also the competitors.
And Steve, this weekend we head to, COTA. There will be a new layout there this weekend, and I wanted you to touch on how that process kind of comes into play, right? Like, there's conversations around having a new layout or some changes that need to be made, but then there's a process that goes into actually making those changes and having them ready for the race weekend. Can you just kind of tell our listeners kind of how, maybe from start to finish, how that looks from your seat?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we've done a really good job as a whole industry to start communicating better among all parties in competition, NASCAR competition included. So naturally, when we come up with an idea that we want to try something, and Marcus puts it out there, the first call is to make sure from a competition stance it's feasible, it's safe. Right. And then to start getting driver feedback to see if what they have done or what may have been done in the past. COTA specific, we wanted to make sure the first few years that we were running on traditional F1 course, naturally, because that's what COTA was known for. And it was really important to have that. As we've seen the races there, and they've been competitive and some really great endings and, great racing throughout. Something to change it up, keep, it's always good. I know it sounds crazy, but to keep the drivers guessing, right? So if we can change things up a little bit, it does make the racing a little bit different and interesting to see from an event standpoint. And it tests their abilities as drivers to make those adaptations and really show who's the best of the best that weekend and why they are the best. So we went to NASCAR competition, started talking about what the pathways would look like if we ran the traditional courses, and when I say traditional, there was an old course that was cut in half. The crazy part about what we're running this weekend is it's not a course that's ever been ran at COTA. So it truly is a new 100% never been ran by anybody until this weekend course that's taken place. There was two cutouts that were there before, so they could run an upper course, so to speak, and a lower course. The lower course was ran, I think last was Supercars, and I think SVG was the last person in today's era of drivers that are driving that drove that course. And there was some pretty irregularities in that cut through that caused the racing not to be as good and somewhat bumpy, so to speak, and dangerous in the car setup and the way these cars activate and the way that the cars are made today, they would bottom out. So getting his feedback was really key. And then naturally talking with some of the other guys and really looking at the sims was a key piece of making the decision of what we ended up with. So really excited about this weekend. I think the changes will make the racing drastically different at COTA and really should create a competitive, that turn 6A as it's called will be a great passing zone. We hope. We'll see. Again, it's not even really sim because they couldn't test it because that track is used so much, and it wasn't able to be 100% scanned. So a lot of the scans were just built in a computer and not physically out with scanning equipment. So that always to me excites me because see the drivers have to show up and jump on a course, and you really get to see how people adapt, how the crew chiefs make differences to the car to adapt to those things, and it should be really exciting.
Little weedy question for you, Steve. That 6A you were talking about. So when we released that we were going to run the shorter course, I think it was in December maybe of 2024, there were those two options that we were looking at, and we chose option 2, which was, I guess, the upper course, as you called it, which is a great way of putting it. But that left-hander would have almost had to be a U-turn. So I know we now instead sort of cut through what would have been I guess turn 7, a right-hander, and now is going straight and making a kind of a 90-degree left. What did you guys have to do exactly from a track standpoint? Did you have to repave anything, grind anything down, add any rumble strips to that area? What all went into that?
Yeah, so we went out there and looked at it naturally, met several times on site to look at that area. And that was runoff currently to make that hard. If they were to stay on the traditional course, it would be, like you said, almost a hairpin, more than 100-degree turn, right? It'd be a really weird, unnatural, probably bad racing, not a good turning spot, not a good passing zone. So we started looking at how can we make it a nicer, smoother, but competitive piece. And with that, we did have to repave because that area being just asphalt runoff was very lumpy there. And I use that word, that's not a great technical engineering term, but it was up and down. So it would create a really good spectacle for airborne cars, which none of us want because we don't want to see cars in a safety perspective. That would be bad. So we ended up taking out asphalt, repaving some asphalt, changing the corner a little bit to where there was rock runoff and creating a more gradual turn, but a competitive turn that could create some passing for somebody to, and we go ahead and throw it out there, dive bomb the corner, right? Like what we saw in Charlotte at the Roval in turn 7. So just looking at it from a full stance, and then also, again, having some drivers to look and give some input on what would be the best thing. Can we race this? Is it raceable? So we did have to repave, and we also, rumble strip wise, with the new configuration, there were existing rumble strips that would have been in driver's left coming into 6 to 7. So we had to grind those down to try to create that smooth, because it would have been really awkward to have rumble strips in the middle of what we would call a racetrack. So we ground those down to get those smooth and make that all tie together to where that pathway is. It's probably still got a little bit of character to it, but it's much better than what it would have been if we'd have left it alone.
I thought it was interesting, Steve, what you were saying about how that you wanted to sort of maintain that F1 quality. Like that's when starting out the first few races, like this is known as an F1 course primarily. So you use that F1 layout. But I think in using that, not only are you using their layout, you also sort of are married to having an F1 race style distance. You know, typically F1 races go anywhere from 40 to maybe 70 or 80 laps. With this change in the layout, you're shaving roughly a minute off of lap times, limiting approximately a mile of the backside, and you're growing the number of laps by 30 plus, I guess, from 68 to around 100. So is that another advantage here? Is it going to feel, I guess, more like a NASCAR race that what fans are maybe traditionally used to, that you get that extra lap count?
I believe so. I mean, what we would typically call a NASCAR road course, right? What we're more accustomed to with Watkins Glen and Sonoma. Naturally, the Roval with the 2.6 mile-ish, 3 mile under lengths wise. So, it does two things. One, keeps the cars bunched up together. Naturally, the longer the course is, the two areas the area of the track that we took out had probably the two longest straightaways that were on that course, which let cars, naturally get spread out a little bit more, because some cars had more speed, some could handle better. This kind of puts it back to where the fans are going to get to see the cars pass them more naturally, because they're doing more laps around. And then you're going to see, I wouldn't call it a typical NASCAR, oval style race, but a typical NASCAR street, or not street course is the wrong word to use, but road course scenario, to where it's got technical sections, it's got speed. Naturally the S's are still going to be fast. The straightaway on the front stretch is still going to be fast, but the cars are going to stay bunched up a little bit closer together instead of getting spread out as much as they have in a typical race that we've ran at COTA with the Formula One style racetrack.
Steve, I have one more on COTA for you. So we're going to see something I don't believe we've ever seen before in NASCAR, and that's Tech Pro. So I don't know if many of the fans know about this, but if you're an F1 fan, you do. They use it in F1, but it's really a barrier, a Tech Pro barrier. I believe it's about 400 pounds that we're going to be placing at the apex of 4, 5, and I believe 19. And maybe even in the entry, apex, and exit of those turns. You can tell me that information. But can you talk about what this barrier is, what we're hoping to use it for? I know you've used it in the past, and maybe sort of the genesis of this idea for COTA and the NASCAR race this weekend.
Yep. So, most of the tracks we go to, we have safer barrier on the outside walls. That's an energy absorbing system that helps the cars when they're, make large contacts. It's done a tremendous amount of good for the sport. Dr. Sicking got an award here recently at the Hall of Fame because of the invention of that. With that, naturally, the European version, as I compare it, is Tech Pro, right? So the European version is a plastic material it's a large structure that's made up with foam and it's tied together with cables. I won't bore you with how it's all constructed, but long story short, we don't go to tracks that usually have that, right? Because the only tracks that typically spec or use Tech Pro are Formula One tracks. So COTA being the one only purpose-built F1 track in the United States, naturally has Tech Pro. So with that product, we've looked at it, naturally for road courses that we have at our facilities that are just club tracks and whatnot. We started thinking about, the competition piece again, working with the NASCAR competition, and Elton Sawyer, Jerry Kaproff and his team, and John Probst. What can we do in those turns to help with the officiating as we have seen in the past few years coming through the S's. And how can we make that more on the drivers in lieu of, a computer program or watching a screen and trying to make calls and really being inundated with that piece of it for that race. So one of the ideas that came up was, can we put something in the apex of the turns to stop that? The Tech Pro was a piece that they actually utilize, for safety. So naturally it meets the safety parameters. It really acts like if we remember the days of Sonoma when we had the tire packs in turn 11 to keep the cars, basically staying on the course and not cutting the corners. The tire packs will do that, standalone tire packs. The Tech Pro is just a more refined product that we have the opportunity to use, and with a lot of consultation and, again, speaking with the drivers and getting driver feedback, the Tech Pro will be placed in those locations. It's a large, as you pointed out, weighted product that will kind of signify where the turns are, but if a car hits it, it doesn't destroy the car, as we kind of remember back in the days of Roval and Bubba Wallace deciding the backstretch chicane was a jump in lieu of an obstacle. So we definitely don't want that again, and we didn't want to create something like that. So we feel like this was a good compromise, and it really puts it back in the drivers. It gives them a visual as well as a barrier that kind of keeps them in the track, so track limits don't become an issue, and we're not trying to police track limits through the S's. It keeps them on the track, and it also has a visual piece of it that shows them where the edge of the track is, so they can then stay on the course and make the S's a lot better for the fans and us as well. So we're not, wondering why 15 cars just got penalties and now they're a lap down.
Well, Steve, really appreciate your time and your perspective and the input on both Atlanta that we just wrapped up and now we're going to COTA this weekend. And thank you from a personal note. You're always super helpful to me when I have dumb questions about racetracks, and I know you're a valued resource to the NASCAR competition team. So appreciate all that. Good luck in COTA this weekend. We'll see you down there, and it's going to be a great one. So thanks for your time, Steve.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.
All right. Our next segment may just be my favorite segment. It is our first edition of fan questions. Shout out to all the fans who sent us questions on X. Please continue to send us questions. It's an opportunity that we really have wanted since the day we started kind of dreaming up the idea of this podcast, is to be able to answer questions that the fans send us. So we're going to kick off a segment here where we're going to answer 3 questions, and we'll be sure to tell you guys at the end of the show how you can send your questions in. Our first question up is from Patrick, and I'm going to read his question. Can we get an explanation of why we do so many caution laps now? I mean, over the past couple years, it's just increased so much. Last night, referencing Sunday night in Atlanta, 8 laps for a piece of debris.
It's a dramatic reading. That was good.
It was. I feel like fans sometimes, though, when they like compose their tweets, they're composing them with a lot of passion. So I wanted to bring that to the table with our fan segment. Yeah. So Patrick, great question. I do think each incident, can kind of be its own thing, which I know if you're a listener and a NASCAR fan, you love and hate that answer all in the same. But a couple of things that go into cautions and maybe why, some seem longer than others. So a couple of things. Number one, you truly have to get the track clear. So that means that once the caution comes out, you've got to slow the field down, depending on what track we're at or maybe where the debris or the incident occurred. They have to be able to obviously slow the field down so the equipment can get to the proper place to pick up a piece of debris or to start a cleanup. I know this week in Atlanta, we had a few instances where cars would actually oil down much of the track. So that is a much longer cleanup. If the incident has blocked pit road, there is an element where you cannot open or close pit road if it is blocked. So that comes into play. And then also, before we go back green, typically we also open and close pit road as well. So there's a couple of variables that go into play, kind of how you get into that, routine of moving through those caution laps. And then also with the addition of the choose rule, where drivers can choose, kind of where they want to start on the restart, that has also added time to a caution procedure. So again, totally understand. Sometimes if you're sitting at home, you are, questioning like, what is taking so long? What are they doing? But ultimately, most of the time, if you ever listen to the official channel and, it feels like they're adding laps or it's just taking, feels like it's taking too long. Most of the time that's just because there's an extended cleanup. We need to open or close pit road. We obviously have to let them choose. But then also sometimes it's just making sure everyone can get back safely, whether that be the equipment, making sure, if someone went out and got debris, they're able to safely return to that truck and then get to the proper place before we go back, to green flag condition. So appreciate the question, Patrick. It's a great one, maybe one that we'll talk about throughout the season.
And I will take the next one. It is from Dusty, a.k.a. Ty Dillon. Why do cars have to be towed to a certain part of the garage when they can't drive back to the pits with flat tires? Why can't they just be dropped in their pit box to put on fresh tires? I joke, I say that in jest, that it was Ty Dillon, but he had the same question, or his crew chief did at least. And it's a great question, Dusty. So this is part of the new DVP policy. So in the past, we did sometimes take it to the garage. Sometimes we did give them the benefit of the doubt and bring it to the pit box. In collaboration with the race teams, the new DVP policy isn't really just a NASCAR built in a vacuum policy. We did reach out to some of the race teams and several of the race teams and ask for input and run our ideas past them. And this was one that we did come back, the teams came back with this suggestion. I think a lot of it has to do with, and you've heard this in the past with the old DVP policies, we don't want a tow truck driver making the decision on whether our race is over or not, or where they should put their car. Plus, there are some times where the driver argues with the truck driver, saying, "Bring me to the pit box. I am going to the pit box." So, really, it was just a way to simplify everything. If you get hooked up to a tow truck, you're going to the garage, period. There's no more arguments of you need to take me to pit road because my car is not that bad when it's actually not very, very bad. It's just NASCAR and the teams all said, hey, let's make it simple. If you get hooked up, boom, you're going to the garage. So that is the answer to that one, Dusty. Great question.
Okay, next question is from Randy. Can you please explain that the Truck and Xfinity series use different race directors? So great question, Randy. I think maybe you're asking us to confirm that or to provide more details. So yes, the Truck and Xfinity series does use their own set of race directors. Those two race directors are Jesse Little and Chase Briscoe. I hope that you have the opportunity to get to know both of them at some point during the season here on Hauler Talk. And then for the NASCAR Cup Series, it is Juson Hamilton, who you heard from last week, and Tim Berman, who has been a longtime race director within the NASCAR family. So how that works ultimately during the race weekend is for Truck and Xfinity. Those are the two gentlemen who call those races. And then, like I mentioned, we have two for Cup. One other thing to note while we're talking about race directors is that once we hit the playoffs, we do, because the playoffs are unique, there's a certain number of races in a small amount of time. Tim or Duson will call those races. They call Truck, Xfinity, and Cup. Whatever is on the weekend schedule for the race that we are at, they will call all of those races. So that's kind of how it works. And like I said, I hope you get to know all of them throughout the season.
Yeah, and Jesse Little, you may know that name. I've heard that name if you're a race fan. He was a former driver, so it's pretty cool to have a former driver in that seat. And I will also just add that having a different race director from Xfinity and Truck to the Cup race is not new. That has been going on as long as I've been here, and this is my 19th season. So that is pretty par for the course, standard operating procedure for NASCAR. And our last question, Chris, track limits this weekend at COTA. Where will they be enforced, and are there exceptions? So the long answer is everywhere. The rule book does state if you shortcut a course, you can be penalized. So that is if there is a incident of shortcutting the course, we can call it. However, there will be a more of an officiating emphasis on the S's. So that's 4 and 5 specifically, and as we mentioned, 19 is another one, and we're going to have Tech Pro barriers at turns 4, 5, and 19. And what that is really doing is they're going to be sort of the officials for us. They'll be put in the apex of each of those turns. So if a driver does shortcut it, they're going to hit that barrier. And so it kind of really solves the problem for itself, hopefully. But to answer your question, Chris, great one. Appreciate it. I think the S's are the ones we're really going to be looking at. But in short, if you shortcut anything and we notice it, you can expect a penalty. And that is all the questions we have. Really appreciate you reaching out on X for those questions. Keep them coming. You can reach out to me at mforde, MFORDE, or Amanda at Amanda M. Ellis on X. Nate has a X account but doesn't look at it, but kind of does now. I think we're drawing him back in. He's like Godfather
Facebook
3.
page. I have a Facebook page that people can find me on. Look for my professional Facebook page where I'm posting actually links to listen to Holler Talk and also content I do for NBC and NASCAR.com. So that's the place to go.
Speaking of which, please read Nate's story on Carson Hocevar. One that we talked about on this podcast. Nate has a really good grasp of the history of the sport and can pull up anecdotes from years ago and really relate them to the drivers of today. And I think he does a really good job of that, comparing Hocevar to some of the drivers of a decade or two ago, like Carl Edwards and Brad Keselowski and Kyle Busch. And I thought it was a very well done story, Nate. It was probably fun writing that because Carson's a character, and I think he's going to be a storyline guy for you media folks for many years to come.
He is, and thanks, Forde. I did enjoy writing that for that very reason, and I know we had hoped to maybe talk some Carson Hocevar, but not going to be able to do it in this episode, but I'm sure in a future episode, based on what we saw at Atlanta, there will probably be some Carson Hocevar discussions in Holler Talk's future. I'm looking forward to those.
No question about it. So I think that's our show. Amanda, any parting words? Thank you for all the insight from Atlanta. I know you had a busy weekend, but you brought the heat today and let the fans know all about all the goings on at Atlanta. So I know you have a weekend off. Any big plans for this weekend?
No big plans for this weekend, but a friendly reminder to all of our listeners to subscribe, rate, and review the show. A big thank you to those of you who have already done that. We love reading your reviews. Appreciate your feedback, good or bad. And we're excited to see you guys next week for episode 4 of Holler Talk. Friendly reminder, send those fan questions in. Let us know what you want us to hear from us or kind of what you want to talk about. And if you have any suggestions on a future, guest to have on the show, please feel free to send that to us as well. So we hope everyone has a great week and weekend. Please keep, watch the action from COTA, and we'll be here next week to break it down.
One plug before I go, and Nate has talked about this already. Watch the action this weekend at COTA on Fox. And after the action is over, please stay tuned. After the post-race show on Fox, NASCAR Inside the Race podcast. It's live on YouTube. You can also download the episode. Steve Letarte and Jeff Burton do a really good job of breaking down the race. So if you really need more NASCAR content after the race, that is going to be the place to go. They've done a really good job. I thought they did a really good job last week breaking down the caution that ended the Cup race at Atlanta. So they're going to be doing more of the same of that. So check that out. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.